Also, just going through the different scripts that are available in your training manual, and we can send these out independently as well. But just kind of a recap and a reminder of the must-dos as we do a pre-need presentation, and we're working through the Personal Wishes Organizer, which is the main tool we have to build value in pre-arrangement. So once we've got the appointment and once we're sitting with the family, a lot of times that appointment is based upon the idea that you're bringing them this Personal Wishes Organizer and what a valuable book it is and how cool it is and how everybody should have one. And unfortunately, sometimes we find ourselves talking so highly about the Personal Wishes Organizer, and then we spend very little time in the book and just kind of jump into prices and then kind of wonder why people aren't making the decision to move forward with their planning. So take this seriously, probably is the best way to put it, that it is a very crucial part of your sales presentation. Even with walk-ins and call-ins, any lead source, even those who imply that they're ready to do something, I've seen it so many times where we just skip the Personal Wishes Organizer or we just hand it to them as a last-minute thought. Oh, yeah, here's the book I told you that I was going to give to you. We don't spend any time inside the book. You're going to miss out on really great opportunities to build value. And as we've talked about before, until value, or the V, is bigger than P for price, which we do through the Personal Wishes Organizer, families won't make the decision to fund their plan. So this is a very important part of the presentation process. So as you get ready to head out on those appointments, Cindy, that you set for today, now we have an opportunity to sit in front of a family. So let's bring our best presentation and build value. So with that being said, I'll turn things over to Aaron here, but let me share my screen first because you guys don't see anything yet. Share that. Is that where you want to start, Aaron? Is that great? Okay. Change all this up. So I'm gonna get rid of it all. Okay, perfect. All right. So we're going to start with the must-dos, and she'll kind of toggle back and forth between the Personal Wishes Organizer, the must-dos, and then also we might want to start here.
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, this is our opening statement and transition question. So I'll let her just take it from there, starting with the concept of the warm-up and then taking us right into the presentation.
Thanks, West. So hi, everyone. I'm excited. Sometimes it's nice when we have a smaller group because it allows people to jump in and ask questions. So if you want to unmute yourself, if you have any questions or thoughts, let me know. I know a lot of you have had some really exciting stories lately. And for those of you just getting started, I just want to say when I first started, my very first appointment was a walk-in that literally was ready to go. And I went through the whole thing and I didn't know what I was doing or up from down, and it went well. So then I thought, well, I can just buzz through these pretty quick and everyone will buy. And my next 3 or 4 appointments, that was, if you guys saw my presentation, they needed to talk to their kids or their financial advisor. And I realized I had not built the value. So even though there are probably 10 to 15% of your families will buy, whether you go through this or not, first of all, it's just a service level. I mean, if you really want to help families and help them be as prepared as possible, go through this book. Whether they're ready to buy or not, it will build the value, but it will just also help you build that relationship of trust that's necessary to earn the right to ask for the money at the end. So we're going to start here with the opening statement. I just want to back up a little bit, just a kind of a review. When you're at the home, if you're in the home versus the funeral home, do your best to sit at a table. Make sure you can see both, if it's a couple, both people eye to eye, so they're not sitting on either side of you. Generally, a warm-up is about 5 to 10 minutes. That doesn't mean you can't be talking about funeral-related items, but before you actually get into the book. But then it's important as you pull out the actual Personal Wishes Organizer, before you get into that you have some sort of value statement. So the statement here, I'll just read a version of what's written in the script, but Bob and Mary, I'm very excited to show you the Personal Wishes Organizer that I promised when we spoke on the phone. The planning guides are the first steps in making decisions for yourselves so that your family will know what you want for final arrangements, removing the heavy emotional and financial burden from them. Families who have used this book and filled them out have told us they are one of the most important and helpful books that they have ever received. Some people also add this line, it's up to you, but the books cost us about $3 to print, but when they're filled out, they're priceless. So you have to make it, you have to build the value of the book. Now, We talk in training. There's some pieces of training that it's important that you memorize this part of a script verbatim. This is not one of those. Whatever feels valuable to you, share that. Even if it's as short as, Steve, thanks for meeting with me today. This is the book I've been kind of calling you about the last 6 months, and I'm so glad we're finally able to get together. I can't tell you how meaningful this will be to your children when the time comes. Do not just jump right into the book, because that value won't be there. So I had a good talk with Melanie yesterday, and she had a couple of really good appointments. And it's easy sometimes. We talked about how to get off just on the money and how we get so focused on the money. And if you build the right value statement at the beginning, you're getting away from the money to start with. So you're starting off on the right foot, talking about the benefit of this book to their children and how planning will help them. So any questions or thoughts on your opening statement or value statement? Okay, great. So there's 4. Oh, yep.
Hey, so on the opening statement, I really like what's in the book, and I think that's great the way it's scripted, but I think you can't stress enough how this should come off in your own words and just be as genuine as possible.
Right. In fact, do you want to share yours, Michael? Because I love what you say about the roadmap.
I knew you were going to do that. Yes. So yeah, what I say is I hold up the book and just say, this is basically a roadmap to your family at the time of need. It's a piece of gold when it comes back to us filled out. And really, you can't stress the importance of how important it is until it's been used. So something like that.
Yep, I love it. And comes from the heart.
Another resource is if you log into the Envision training portal on the website, watching the PWO presentation there, how Vicki puts in her own script as well. And so then it can kind of give you an idea of how you can do that. And I guess not script, but her own personalization.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's the key is whatever, Vicki's actually the one who taught us the line about these books cost us about $3 to print. That's something she uses. And for her, it's very powerful because it feels real. I've heard from people, I don't love that line. Fine, totally fine with me, but you have to have something. So if you don't have a value statement, I challenge you to just jot something down or even, voice to text it into your phone and send it to me or Travis or Michael. Just have something that you're comfortable with. It doesn't have to be terribly long. I like the roadmap and the gold that Michael uses because it's a visual representation. It gets people to kind of start to understand the importance of this instead of saying, yeah, okay, just leave the book. They're understanding the value of it. So thanks, Michael. Thanks for always letting me put you on the spot. You just handle it so well. So, all right. So these 4 transition questions, these are questions that when I say there's areas you can run through or skip or kind of make your own, this is not one of those. It's incredibly important that we ask these 4 questions. Does anyone know, I know all of you have heard these questions, but before we get into this, why do we ask these 4 questions before we get into the personal wishes organizer? No wrong answers. All right, I won't put anyone else on the spot. I'll just give you the answer. You probably know, but it's important, A, that we start to build that emotional urgency, whether it's an aftercare or a community event lead. We need people to understand the importance of this, but most importantly, they have to say it in their own words. So if we sit and tell people why they need to pre-plan, what it's going to look like, who's likely to come into the funeral home, why we feel like it's important, it's not going to mean much to them. But if they tell us in their own words, quite frankly, how often have you guys gone through this part of it and then really the presentation is given by the family to you? Scott, let me tell you exactly why I want to get this done. And yes, we have talked about it. And this is what I'm thinking. And this is what I want and what I don't want. And I've got 3 girls and I don't want, they'll tell you everything you need to know. And this is also where your active listening has to really kick in. Make sure that these questions don't feel like they're just being thrown at the family. They generally are going to now start to open up and be vulnerable. And you want to appreciate that and honor that they're doing that with you. So the first question here is, have the 2 of you ever taken some time to discuss what you would want for funeral arrangements if one of you had died unexpectedly? So we've got Cindy on the call who hasn't run a lot of appointments by herself. So what does everyone generally hear when you ask that question? Have people talked about it or not? Everyone can unmute. What a quiet group today. Anyone?
Sorry, you cut out there for a second.
Oh,
Well,
that's okay. Generally,
what
have
was the
people
question?
talked about or not talked about their arrangements?
Yeah, generally they probably have talked about it before you're meeting with them.
Right, right. It's a rare that you get into a house and they say, well, we have no idea. We've never discussed it. Now, there might be a version of, we're not sure if we want traditional burial or cremation, but it's important to get them to start talking with you about it. So if they say, yep, I know exactly what I want. My family's done traditional funerals in the Catholic Church, or I want an LDS service, or I want to be cremated and scattered in the ocean, great. Now you have an idea, but then ask a little bit further. Dig into that a little bit deeper. So tell me more about that. Why do you feel that? Why, tell me why that would be meaningful for you. If you have a couple that's stuck, that can't make a decision together, then get them, let's talk through it. You know what? He won't talk about it. He won't even tell me. Then you have to, it's the elephant in the room. It's back to the elephant that we have in training. Deal with the elephant in the room. So number 2, have you ever had to make funeral arrangements for a loved one? This one is a powerful question. If it's an aftercare and you're meeting with the family within a few weeks of a service, obviously you know the answer to this. So you might adjust this question a little bit to say, so tell me how things went when you were making arrangements for your mother. So if you can get them to start to talk with you about what that was like, this is probably the most powerful question because they'll start telling you what they have or haven't experienced. So say, have you ever had to make arrangements for a loved one before? Get them to talk to you and then say, what was the hardest part about that for you? And then an obvious follow-up question is, so had they discussed this ahead of time? Was it planned or wasn't? And either way is fine, but now we've got an idea of where their head's at and the value of that. Quite often they'll say, no, it wasn't planned, and that's why we're here today. I do not want my kids to go through this. Or yes, Dad had everything taken care of. It was the best thing he could have done. That's why I'm here. So it's important to ask that question. But then if they tell you what the hardest part is, that, you know what, I couldn't even get dressed to go to the funeral home. It was just gut wrenching. Or I haven't talked to my brother now in 2 years because we had so many disagreements about the service. So ask questions, ask follow-up, be an active listener. So tell me about that experience. Who was it for? If they say, yes, we have, dig in. So tell me a little bit about who that was for. Were you close with them? Tell me about the service. So really kind of get into that question. And then number 3, so we adjusted this one recently. If it's a couple, you don't want to say if one of you had passed away because they'll always default to the spouse. But just, Bob and Mary, heaven forbid, but if something happened and you had both passed away yesterday, who would be in meeting with our funeral director today? And take a minute, let it be quiet, let that sink in. This is a place that usually the guys, no offense, but again, they'll make some weird joke about who'd be in, or I don't know, let my son deal with it. He's given us such heartache, haha. But you really need to get them to visualize what that day is going to look like without being cruel. If they say our kids would be in, so okay, how many kids do you have? What are their names? Really get them to paint that picture. How many children do you have? We have 3. So who do you think would kind of be in charge of leading that arrangement? Well, probably our middle daughter. She's kind of the most responsible. Get them to talk to you about that. And then this is critical. You have to at some point say, and do you have an idea of what this would cost? So if one of you or both of you passed away, how much would a funeral and burial cost today? If it's okay if they're low or if they're high, most people have a general idea. But if the first time they hear that an average funeral with burial is $12,000 is at the end when you're also asking them for that money, it's very difficult because they're going to be in shock. So if you had passed away yesterday, both of you, who would be meeting with the funeral director? Do you know how they would pay for it? And do you have an idea of how things would cost? But back to that, painting that picture, just get them to visualize it. Any questions or thoughts up to this point? Okay, we'll continue on. So the next is actually part of the personal organizer. So it's the pie chart, or the umbrella rather. And this is the umbrella of protection page. So you've now asked the 3 questions as you're sort of holding the personal wishes organizer, which I'm actually going to jump to. So you're holding this, you're showing it to them as you're asking those 3 questions. And then the 4th question is actually just that first page. So I'm going to flip to that. So toggling between them here. So Bob and Mary, we invest in protection for our families that we may never use. We have homeowners insurance, medical insurance, quite frankly, hoping we never need to use any of them. There are many reasons that more and more families are choosing to add this protection under their umbrella. So now as we're pointing to the umbrella in that first page, you turn the book to them and you simply say, just so I know what to focus on in our time together today, could you please share with me the main 1 or 2 reasons that stand out to you as to why you finally agreed to meet with me to get your planning done today? Use the assumptive words and then stop talking. Let them have a minute to read through that. I've even seen there's a couple people who've printed out a version of this, if any of you would like it, where it's where there's a checklist and that paper is left with the family and they check it off. So for those of you on the call, of the reasons listed kind of right here, what do most people say is their main reason for pre-planning?
Peace of mind.
Yes. Who is that? Good job.
Joseph.
Joseph, wonderful. Peace of mind, and what would the other one be?
To remove the burden from their loved ones.
Yes.
Melanie.
Thanks, Melanie. Good job. I don't know how I didn't recognize Joseph's voice. I only talk to you every day. Sorry, Joseph. Yes, good job. And those are usually the 2 main reasons. They almost always will say take the burden off loved ones, and then peace of mind.
I'll just add a piece to that as well. This is about the time in the presentation, you guys, you're going to determine that there's in the relationship, there's someone who's doing a majority of the talking. We want to really identify that because we don't want to leave that person out. So if it's the wife that's answering all of the questions, the husband's just sitting there quiet while you're going through things, this is the time that we really want to start identifying that and involving him in the conversation. So if the wife says, well, we want to take the burden off of our kids, and I've been getting all the answers from her, I might then turn to Bob and say, Bob, what would be the most important reason for you personally? And kind of start engaging that other person. So it's really important that we're presenting to both parties. And once you identify that someone is kind of the spokesperson for the marriage, that we ask specific questions to the person who's not doing a lot of talking. So it's very easy to say, and what do you think, Bob? Or what do you think is the most important reason? And he might be more of a logical thinker, well, I don't want my kids to spend a lot of money, or I don't want them to, or I want to freeze the prices. So then you have that emotional side and you have that logical financial side. So just remember that the presentation is for both people, and identify who's doing the talking and then start asking some pointed questions the person who's not, because their opinion more than anything is going to matter when you get to the close. And if they haven't had a lot of communication this whole time and one person's doing all of the answering of the questions, you're going to kind of find yourself stuck in a spot.
Right. And I will say a lot of times you'll get one or the other, not a lot, but sometimes where they'll say it's all financial. I just want to save as much money as possible. That's great. And it's good that you know that. But I would also follow up with that. Your wife shared that it's to remove the burden from your children. Is there any part of that resonates with you? Because usually there is an emotional motivation for both, although some, again, usually the men or the engineers, the more analytical, the accountant types are going to say, well, it's all about the money. But follow that up a little bit. You don't want to create a reason that's not true, but usually they will admit that, yes, I don't want my kids to go through this. Back to the conversation Melanie and I had yesterday. She met with a family that had plenty of money, and sometimes then it just becomes about the money. But, what really motivated you to walk into a funeral home today? Probably it wasn't so that you could get the best return on your investment. Probably it's because you want to remove that burden from your spouse or from your children. But getting them to say that in their own words. So this page is incredibly important. You've all heard me say when my first 6 months, I skipped it. I thought it was a little cheesy because I didn't really understand it. And once I started spending just a minute on this page, it really made a huge difference. It made my presentation easier because I felt like I was listening to them and understanding them more. So take some time, make sure you're spending some time in this page. Any thoughts or questions here before we move on? Okay. So the next section, we're going to kind of transition to the message to my loved ones. As we're going through the book, this is a very powerful piece. When I was actually out with Michael and his team out there, he has, I don't know if Armand's on the call, but he does something, and Michael also does, that works very well. I used to read this line to families, but they are actually, and Michael, are you also still doing this where you're having them read it?
Yes, yeah, and Armand is in here.
Oh, hi Armand, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Armand, the away from home king. Nice work. Armand, do you mind sharing this page and what you do? And do you care if I put you on the spot?
No, I'll do it. If
Okay.
my
Just
kids can
briefly kind of how you explain it and then how you kind of turn it around and what you do.
Oh yeah, basically, so I just asked the family. Usually, I'll ask the husband if he would read the second line out loud for me, because, like you said earlier, normally the wife is doing all the talking.
Right.
So to get him engaged, I asked him to read it out loud for me.
Can you share the story about the family you'd met with just before I was there last time and kind of that dynamic between the two, and then what happened when you had him read it?
Which family is that?
Well, you had a family that he was a little standoffish and wasn't very interested, and then if I recall correctly, Michael, maybe you remember too, you had turned it around and said, "Here, Robert, can you please read this paragraph?"
Oh, right. She was when they first came in, all the questions I was asking, I'd look at him and he would look at her, and he said, "My wife is in control of everything. I'm just here to listen." And so then when I asked him to read it, it kind of turned things around a little bit, and she kind of looked at him like yeah, she actually started tearing up.
Yeah.
When he read it. So
Yeah.
it was very emotional.
Good for you. And good for you for being aware enough to recognize that. A lot of people would just say, well, he's sitting there listening, I'm just going to continue on. But you had the awareness to notice that he wasn't as engaged. And so you thought to have him read that. So good job, Armand. Thanks for letting me pick on.
If you don't get them both involved, then in the 32 years I've been doing this, you're not going to get a sale.
Absolutely. And it's not always the women, but usually it is the women that are more engaged. And so you just have to kind of make an effort. So I'm going to read this sentence, this paragraph. And what I do is it's the first sentence of the second paragraph. Some people have them read the whole second paragraph. But how I explain this page is, Bob and Mary, I feel that this sentence best describes the purpose of our visit today. You will then sign and have a witness sign this page so that when your children bring this book out on one of the hardest days of their lives, they'll know that this was a gift to them. So, and I love what Armand does, but have them read it. But it says, in this personal wishes guide, you will find information I have recorded and arrangements I have made in advance, hoping to relieve you of the burden of these decisions when you're under stress. You slow it down a little, you lower your tone a little bit, but usually if people have been real upbeat and jokey and maybe kind of deflecting with humor up to this point, you'll feel the tone change a little bit, kind of like Armand just shared, and you will have people tear up. I mean, it's a pretty powerful sentence. So they can sign it here or not, but it's important that you read that sentence and kind of sets the tone for the book. So any other questions or thoughts on that?
So on the productivity call last week, we went over the 10 questions. We're not going to go through those in detail today. This could be a good place for a follow-up question. Like once you read that and you kind of let that sit just a few seconds, you could follow that up with, what kind of experience would you like for your children to have when one of you passes away? And so just a really good follow-up question that basically we're eliminating them to making difficult decisions when they're under a great deal of stress. So we kind of made this statement, and maybe that follow up with the question of, what kind of experience would you like for your family to have when one of you passes away? And then just kind of let that sit for a minute, because you just read this, it's powerful, it's sitting with them. it's a great time to use one of those 10 powerful questions to basically reinforce the principle of not having to make these decisions during a difficult time. So anytime during your presentation, Aaron's going to go through this, but you're on a particular thing and you make a very powerful statement, if you could follow that up with an open-ended question just to kind of draw out the feelings that they're feeling after they've heard that, it's going to just continue to reinforce the value of planning ahead of time.
And also with that question, and I'm going to add open-ended question, pause. Don't be afraid of that silence. That is the most powerful pause, or one of the most powerful pauses in all the presentation, because it's really hitting. It's making them think. And so let that sink in as they answer it. Don't rush it at all. And that's really going to help to solidify everything.
Absolutely. Sometimes we get nervous about, or, you know, a little silence makes us uncomfortable. And actually, if it's making you uncomfortable, that's good. You know, we've talked about this, and for all the sales West's made, or I've made, or Spencer, or any of you, in every sale you make, no matter how strong of a relationship you have, there's always a part that's slightly uncomfortable. And that means you're doing it right. And it's not discomfort because things are off. It's discomfort because it's vulnerable and they're allowing you into a sacred space of their lives. And it should feel a little uncomfortable. And you should be honored to be there with them. But don't rush through these questions. And I love that question. And Melanie, you know, we had that talk yesterday, thinking back to that family. So she had a family that came in. The daughter was there. They have a lot of money. But just that question, what kind of experience do you want your children to have, or your daughter here to have, when the time comes? And then just let it sit in. I mean, that by itself, they'll probably tell you everything you need to know at that point as to why this is no longer about just the money. So if that's helpful. Great job, Wes.
Yeah, Aaron. Can I?
Yep.
So one thing I say when it becomes all about money, and this phrase has really helped a lot, I think, maybe kind of change the tone or the way people are thinking about it, is just something like, no amount of money can take away the grief or heartache your child can feel on the day that they lose you. The only thing that can change that or help ease that burden is making these decisions today.
Wow. Why haven't I never heard that before, Michael?
I don't know.
Okay, email that to me. That was great. Yeah, that's very powerful. Are you still on, Melanie?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. That's hopefully those are some really good tools for you as well.
No, that's a really good one, Michael. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
sure.
Way to go. You get quote of the day, Michael. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Great. I think that's the key, is because we don't want to be cruel or, you know, overwhelming with how difficult it's going to be, but we do need the families to understand that. And if we can do that in a very kind, compassionate, but honest way, I think that was very beautifully said. So yeah, type that up. We'll send it out to everyone. Okay, so we've done the message to my loved ones. Now in this part, I do bring it up a little bit. Those first, the umbrella and the message are a little bit heavier. Now we kind of bring it back up. And we're going to go through the pages sort of like I do. The pages you cover do not have to be exactly the same as the pages I cover, or Melanie or Scott or Phyllis or anyone, but it's important that it's important to you. So this page is obviously important, and hopefully you have the actual vital statistics page. But with every question or every page we cover, make sure you have a question associated with it. There's about a 90-second window of time that if you're talking to someone, it becomes talking at them and they will lose interest. So more than about a minute of talking, it starts to get lost. So make sure you're engaging them. So for example, on this page, you know, Mary, I know you said you'd made arrangements for your uncle. Have you ever had to fill out a death certificate? Usually people have, and then a follow-up. So tell me a little bit about what that was like. Oh, it was terrible, or luckily he wrote it down so we had everything, or his birth date was wrong and so we had to reorder death certificates. But they're telling you in their words why this page is important. Good news, before we're done today, part of having your planning done, again, being assumptive, is that we'll also have what's called your vital statistics, and that's all of the information necessary for the funeral director related to your death certificate. Sounds good, doesn't it? You know, and you kind of make it, wow, good news. And people are very appreciative of this page. Next is details for the service. So we are not going through each of these line by line. We're not filling out the book, but we are going to ask a couple questions. So I think Richard's on the call. Richard, are you on? He's probably muted, but Richard's
Yep.
Hey, Richard, thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Oh, no worries. Thank you.
I was meeting with Richard. He's a Marine. I would then say, Richard, we talked about your service, and have you thought about if you want your flag draped or folded? And then wait for them to respond. Have you thought about that for you, Richard?
Yes, for me, it's going to be draped, and then they'll fold it and hand it to my wife.
Think of that. If you're in a presentation and you're with a family, how powerful that is. Because probably the wife hasn't heard that before. So, Mary, did you know that? Or in his case, Emma, did you know that that was the case? And that's a pretty powerful visual. So if you have a veteran, make sure to ask that question. And then follow up. It is not inappropriate to ask religious preference. It's relevant to what we're doing. It's not coming from a place of judgment, but we need to know that because that will affect what type of service they have. So, Bob, you said you are Catholic. Is that the type of service you anticipate having? Do you want it at the church? Do you know who you would have, orchestrate? Do you have a pastor? So, and then clothing preferences. So on this page, I wouldn't pick more than 3 questions, but find a few things that stand out to you. If they're not a veteran, just say, have you thought about what you'll wear? I noticed you're wearing glasses. Do you want your glasses on? It just kind of gets them thinking about, wow, all the decisions the family would have to think about. We don't have to fill that out. We can fill out a few things if they tell us, but otherwise just kind of pick that. Anything else on this page that anyone covers or that they like? Okay, great. So next is kind of additional service information. I really like this page because I thought it was sweet to talk about the pallbearers, but I always suggested families write this in pencil. So obviously this might change, and this is what I said to families, but pallbearers and honorary pallbearers, yes, women can be pallbearers. So if you have someone that's younger, if you have young nephews, or if you have people that are older, even if they're no longer here, it will be sweet that the family sees that you wrote their names. So make sure to list the pallbearers here. This is not a place to get into casket, so I would kind of skip that piece of it. And then there is a part about travel assurance, although it has the T word, so we probably need to update that. Right, Armand? We got to change that to away from home. Okay. Memorialization, this is just about cemetery, and this is also related to cremation. Michael just did a really great training about this, but make sure that people are having a conversation if they're being cremated about what will happen for their final disposition of their ashes, because families are struggling more and more with not having somewhere to go just pay their respects. Have that short conversation with them. Obituary, I love this page. What's a question we can ask regarding this page for obituary? Anyone?
Have you ever had to write an obituary before for someone else?
Perfect. Good job, Melanie. You must have been a funeral director.
The previous life.
Yeah, right. Good work. Yeah, in that question, and Melanie, you could probably say, but it probably gets people to open up, right?
Yeah, absolutely does. And it ties back to that, to those initial questions we ask in the warm-up. So it kind of keeps that all in mind going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, the obituary can be something that's real eye-opening for people. I used to even half joke with them, let's make notes about what we want listed, maybe anything we don't want listed, your second husband that everyone doesn't need to know about, haha, whatever. But people kind of appreciate this page because all of the funeral homes you represent, if the family even just has bullet points about their obituary, the funeral directors will write that for the family to then review, which is a much less overwhelming task than having to write it from scratch. Okay, that's a great page. Make sure you're covering that one. This is a page people don't think about, but this is non-immediate family members to be contacted. So quite often we see families having to search through their phones and make sure Aunt Linda out in Oklahoma knows that you passed away, but just to have a list of everyone that need to be notified, and then friends and organizations. And then this is also a time, on this page, the question I ask, are you part of any organizations or associations outside of work or outside of church if they're retired? And then what is that a good tool for to know? Spencer guessed it, referrals. Good job, Spencer. I knew all of you knew. You're just being shy. So it's good if they say I'm in a softball league or a bowling league or a scrapbook with these ladies twice a month. Okay, good to know. Let's make a note about it, and then we can plant that seed for referrals. But don't spend too much time there.
It's also a good setup because it starts to have them think more of how the magnitude of the services, that it's not, there's a lot of things that you don't think about, like these people that you're gonna contact. And then when they give you these names and you can ask for referrals, it's a great place because they start to see the value of this book and what it's going to do, not only for them, but for their friends as well as their family.
Absolutely. Because the whole point of the referral is to deliver more books. So they only have to see the value of the book. They don't have to think of friends that would want to buy a pre-plan. Sometimes we think of it in terms of who do you know that wants to pre-plan. All we need to know is who do you know that would benefit by having one of these incredibly valuable books. You'll get way more referrals that way. So awesome. Oh,
one last piece I'll add to that page as well, which you don't think about very often, is that if you do discover that they are active participants or members of a church, they're very active in their church, it's a really good opportunity at the end of your presentation to just offer the idea of presenting this information to a group of people at their church or at the Elks Club or at the senior center or whatever. But if you find out that they have something that they're involved with, just simply talk about that. We have a program where we actually present this information to a group of people. Do you think that the people at your church should be interested in receiving this information, and who should I contact? We're all looking for more opportunities to give more group presentations. So if you find out that they are involved with something, it's a wonderful opportunity to say we provide these free lunch and learns or seminars, or we do presentations to groups. Who would I contact to set something like that up? And at this point, at the end of the presentation, they're going to see so much value here. Oh, this would be great for our congregation. Oh, so who do I need to contact? So again, another opportunity for a referral to be able to present to a group of people.
Yeah, great point. I know, Scott, there in Rockford, I know you're working on some of those too, but I'm sure most people you meet with have some affiliation to a church. So that's a great point. Okay, let me see. Why is that doing that? Okay, here we go. So on this page, I simply ask the family, do you have a will or trust? If they have a trust, the next couple pages will already be included in that trust. If they have a trust, you simply say, well, congratulations. Once you also have your funeral plan done today, everything will be in order for your family. If they don't have a will or trust, I always advise, it might be a good idea once you have your funeral plan done today to also at least get a will in place, and then kind of go through the pages. These pages, you'll start seeing people kind of fall asleep, so be careful not to go into too much detail about personal liability and auto insurance, but just make sure they see those pages. Automobile records, mortgages, bank accounts. I mean, that's sort of how I go through these investments. But then this last section is, I'll use Richard again. So Richard, I know you're in the service. This is where you'll enter that information or simply include a copy of your discharge papers or DD 214. So anyone that isn't aware of that, anyone in the military will know what that is, but they can just insert a copy of that in the book. So I want to reemphasize, by this point in the book, as all of you are experiencing, people will start to get a little bit emotionally exhausted. I've seen people spend way too much time in these pages and they kind of lose people. So kind of skim through these last few pages. And then the DD 214. Okay, if they're not in the service, you just skip that piece. So that's kind of the book. And this I call the umbrella and the easy way, hard way page the bookends. So I'm going to go back to the script here. It's the other, let me see, 1 second. Is it this one? Sorry, hold everyone.
Right.
Okay, all right. So this is another page I skipped for about 4 months, and then once I did it once, it worked well. I realized how valuable it was. So usually up to this point, you've built a great relationship. You're getting along, maybe there's some jokes or there's a few tears, but everyone's connecting. But this is your last opportunity to really solidify the importance of pre-planning. And I feel like this is the most important page of the whole presentation. And this, quite frankly, is really where the close happens. If they agree to this page and we now move forward, now it's just a matter of figuring out the costs and making the decisions and find something that works for their budget. It shouldn't feel like a terribly difficult decision at the very end. This is probably the most uncomfortable page, and that's okay. So if you're feeling uncomfortable here, you're doing it right. So let's go back to the script. So there's 2 ways to do this page. The first version is the kind of listed here. This would be more for one that's not an immediate aftercare, or maybe a family that says, well, we're not sure, we're going to think about it, we're not making decisions today, that type of family. That's where you would use this first option. So, you know, Bob and Mary, how long have you been married? Well, do you want to read this one? Wes is really good at this page.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll actually read it. That's
he says
script for script, but this is so taking it back just a little bit in my early on in my career. I'm a guy, I didn't use a whole lot of emotion, and I really focused, as a lot of us do, on locking in prices and sometimes pre-need discounts, and I kind of thought that was an actual motivator for people to move forward. And I had someone come with me on a presentation and just basically said that I was very logical. I didn't bring in any emotion. There was not any opportunity for the family to really kind of dig deep in their emotional side of things to move forward. So this one was taught to me years ago. It's one you have to practice. We talk about it as well, too, that this has to come from a very sincere place. It's not a sales gimmick. It's not trying to draw out emotion when you don't feel it yourself, but just simply asking them, how many years have you been married, Mr. and Mrs. Jones? And they're going to say, oh, we've been married for 25 years. And I said, I bet that during that 25 years together that you've made a lot of important decisions together. You probably decided what homes you're going to own, where your children would go to school, how many children you would have when you were going to retire. And through that whole time, you've been able to discuss these decisions with each other. Is that correct? And they're going to nod and they're going to agree. And then I'm going to say, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, someday one of you is going to pass away. I don't know if it's going to be you, Mr. Jones, or you, Mrs. Jones, but one of you is going to pass away. And these decisions are going to be left to one person. It might be tomorrow, creating some sense of urgency. It might be tomorrow, it might be many, many years down the road. But I do know that someday you're going to be sitting down with the funeral director, and they're going to start asking you questions. And these questions are going to be really difficult to answer because for 25 years, the two of you have been able to discuss major decisions. And when that funeral director is asking you questions, at one point you're going to look to your left, you're going to look to your right, and you're going to realize that the one person that you've been able to turn to for 25 years is not there to help you make these decisions. And it's the first time you're going to realize that you're alone in having to make these decisions. It's one of my goals to make sure that no family ever has to make these decisions on one of the most difficult days of their life. So knowing what you know now about all the decisions that have to be made, would either of you ever want to be left alone to make these decisions by yourself on the most difficult day? And you just kind of just let that sit there for just a second. Practice it and go through it. But the whole idea is that, and that's a real thing, you guys, and those who have sat in at-need arrangements, that's a real thing. I had an experience helping a family pick out a casket at the time of need, and it's interesting that they'll go around and around and around the room, and they'll look and they'll look and they'll look. And one time there was kids, or money wasn't an issue. Well, one of the sons, after being in the room and having different opinions from different kids, one of the sons said, I just wish Dad was here to pick this thing out himself. It would make things a whole lot easier. So we're presenting this idea that someday one of them is going to be at the funeral home alone on one of the most difficult days of their life. And it's going to be the first time they realize that that person who they've been able to talk to all of their decisions about isn't there to help them. And we don't want any family to ever have to go through that. And then from there, we just simply transition to the hard way, easy way page.
Yep, great. He does that way better than me, so I had him do it.
That gives me goosebumps every time I do that, by the way, because I really truly believe it. So just imagine that for just a second. Imagine in your own life, in your own spouse or someone that you care about, what that would look like sitting there on the most difficult day of your life trying to make these decisions. And let that come from the heart, and it will be very, very powerful.
Yeah, and for those of you that are newer, it won't be very long till you're in the funeral home and you see that. You see a family that there's been an unexpected passing and they never talked about it, or they briefly talked about it, but it's not done. And The hardest thing to see, I can say, and it's heartbreaking every time, is to have to see a widow or a widower or a older child or anyone have to walk into a casket selection room for a loved one, and they weren't expecting to do that. So getting them to understand that is critical. If we skim through this page and try to skip that because it's uncomfortable, we're not doing a service to the family. We're now just kind of making it all about the money. So we have to be really careful before we get into the pie chart that we're spending the right amount of time on this page. So as you're newer, until you're comfortable with that whole script, getting it to be your own. The nice thing is this page at least gives you bullet points to have a shorter version of it. So, you know, in reality, Bob and Mary, there's only 2 ways that we can handle the loss of a loved one. As we've talked about earlier, it can happen when it's a matter of necessity. There's emotional overspending. You're alone. It's difficult. It's stressful. You're likely going to be confused, and you're making decisions from a place of grief. Or we can make these decisions together when it's a matter of choice. We have the ability to reason. We can lock in the prices, but we know that we're removing that burden from our children. And wow, what a wonderful memory to have the peace of mind that knowing that we've made these decisions together. So based on what you've shared with me today, Bob and Mary, it sounds like you would rather make these decisions together rather than alone. Is that correct? And usually they'll nod and say yes. And this is where you just simply ask for permission to proceed. So quite often in training, you know, we'll say on the phone, they'll say, how long does it take? Well, the personal wishes organizer only takes about 20 minutes. That's true. Now, we are always asking for permission. They'll always say yes, but all we're saying now is simply, okay, then if it's okay, I would like to share with you this pie chart. It's a visual representation of all the decisions that will need to be made when the time comes. But good news, we're going to make them all today. Sound good? And you just proceed. So any questions kind of from this page to this page, or any thoughts from anyone about this page?
I'll just add, this is the page that most pre-need sales counselors skip the very most because it's the most uncomfortable. It used to be called the easy way, hard. Well, I take that back. It used to at one time be called the right way, wrong way page. Obviously, that terminology has been left out. It's intentional. We don't really want to tell people that they're wrong if they don't want to move forward. There could be a reason behind that. So it is the easy way, hard way. Some people will still choose the hard path, right? I mean, 50% of our presentations at a good closing percentage, 50% are not going to move forward. They might still document some of their wishes. You guys are still helping them. But explaining this, there's only 2 ways to take care of this. And these are your choices, because at this point, there's going to be a death, right? So there's only 2 ways. You can either take care of it ahead of time, deal with the grief, emotional overspending, the uncertainty of making hasty decisions a short amount of time by yourself with a lot of stress and confusion, or you can do it when it's a matter of decisions together. You have the ability to reason. You can create terms that fit your budget. You can lock in prices. You can truly provide protection, security, and peace of mind for those that you love. You can ask this a lot of different ways, but based upon what you shared, you probably want to you want to do this the easy way. I've even just come right out and said, I know it seems like a silly question right now, but which way would you prefer to take care of this? Would you like to do it the easy way or the hard way? That's a little bit more direct, and it's not as assumptive, but I tell you what, 99% of the time, they're going to look at each other and say the easy way. This doesn't mean your job's done. You still got to close the sale, but emotionally, the value is built. So don't skip this page. Don't just explain. And the other mistake I see too is people just explain this page, but they don't pin the family down for an answer on which way they would like to proceed. So you have to, if you're not doing this page at all because it's uncomfortable, get comfortable, because this is, as Aaron said, the most important page. And then get them to either agree with you, as Aaron shared, that they want to do it the easy way, or ask them which way that they'd prefer to do it. But get some confirmation, then transition to the pie chart with their permission. Let's go over the financial decisions that have to be made so that you're going to know exactly what to expect if something were to happen tomorrow. And it's a beautiful page. It's uncomfortable for most people, but when you master this page, it sets up the close so much better. Don't avoid it. Just explain it. get confirmation of the way that they would like to proceed together. And the power behind this is you'll discover almost immediately a transition in how you do things. It's going to be easier to get referrals, but don't just go through the book and explain it. Don't ask any questions and then try to close them. It's just not going to work. You got to go through the steps. You got to follow the process. You got to follow the recipe. We talked about the yards a couple of weeks ago about you got to go 48 inches, and you could go to 46 inches and skipping this page, you're short 2 inches and you're not going to close the sale. You got to go yard, and being a couple inches short is not going to get you the sell. This is where you're at. You're 2 inches short, and we skip this because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, if you're getting people say they need to think about it, almost always this page was either skimmed through or just skipped. So look back and see, am I getting a lot of people say I'll get back to you, or I need to think about it, and then on those review how much you're actually covering this page, because that's usually the answer. So now skipping forward, so we're going to end on time. I just want to say briefly about the pie chart. Be careful now. I had actually a few conversations with people yesterday. This isn't now the point to say, okay, what kind of service do you want? Let me explain everything involved in the service. They've already told you, based on the questions you've asked, what kind of funeral they want. So you'll have the cost estimate out. Now you are the advisor. So this isn't the time to ask a bunch of questions. You should kind of have an idea. Based on what you've shared with me, we're doing the traditional service with the viewing at the church. Is that correct? Great. That's this package A or whatever it's called. And then just simply write it down. If they get overwhelmed and they're already emotionally, kind of at their limits, we have to be careful not to overwhelm them now with all the decisions here. So just make it very simple. So if they have cemetery property, talk about the vault. Obviously, if they want to include money for opening and closing, the headstone, and then services. Casket is where I see most people lose a sale if they're going to at this point, because they just over-explain it. You should never show someone more than 6 to 8 caskets. If you're showing them more than that, you're going to overwhelm them. Ask finding questions. So if costs are the same, Bob and Mary, do you prefer wood or metal? Great, wood. Okay, I don't want to spend a lot. Wonderful. Our caskets range from $3,000 to $12,000. Average is about $4,200. I'm going to start there. We'll go down. Just kind of make it simple. The first one they point out that they like, just write it down and be done. Don't spend 20 minutes on the casket. That's where people you'll lose them. So if you need any more help on that piece, I'm happy to help you. Same with merchandise, and then always include money for non-guaranteed items. You don't want the family to come in, think everything's done, and then they have to pay for death certificates or obituaries. And then at the end, the good news now is the close is just very simple. The total for everything discussed is $15,976. This is where families ask about their options for paying for this. You can pay, you guys know the rest. They're scripting for all of this. But this part shouldn't be emotional because you've gone through the hard part with this page. And the good news, which people tell me is why they skip this, the good news is any real objections will usually also come out here, which is great. We want the objections to come out before we're asking them for $15,972. So get them, we can talk more about that on another objections. Hopefully you guys watched Wes's presentation about that. But make the pie chart simple. Do not over-explain it or overwhelm them. So any thoughts or questions before we wrap up this today?
Erin, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
How much time do you usually spend on totaling the itemization and everything? Because I have to do a full itemization for the funeral home, and then I also have to write up the itemization for the family. Sometimes I just get concerned it's taking a little too long. And if you have any thoughts on, how to make them stay comfortable while you're going through those, because I need to be really thorough with our funeral home GPL because it's itemized by line. And I just want your thoughts on that.
So when you have the pie chart out, you should also have the cost estimate right next to it. And I would make the sale and decision from the cost estimate we have. It's actually written in a way so that it funnels down to a decision. Now I know you have to write out the itemized items, but if it takes 4 or 5 minutes, it's fine. You just set that expectation for the family. Bob and Mary just give you about 3 minutes to total this if you want to grab a water or something, and then be okay with it just quiet. Don't feel like you need to keep chit-chatting as you're doing that. If there's a second
Okay.
you need to fill out for the funeral home, just do that at the end with all the other paperwork.
Okay. Mhm.
I'll add another piece to that too, just some assignments that you find yourself. This is great for anybody, especially if you're brand new and kind of learning the paperwork. It does take a little time. There are two forms we have that are great for them to fill out. One's the child and grandchild protection form. So if you've identified that they have children or grandchildren that are under the age of 18, you can just simply say, well, I'm working on figuring this out. Would you mind filling this out and listing all of your grandchildren that are under the age of 18? So that gives them a little bit of work to do. You can also give them the vital statistics. That's all information that they know: their first name, middle name, last name, maiden name, where they were born. So that's a great form to have and include in your file. Your funeral directors will love you if you include vital statistics with every single contract and you put that on file with the funeral home. So those are two assignments, Melanie, that you could give them. And then also sometimes when I've done it that way, there's the local emergency contacts at the bottom of the page. And so while you're diligently working on numbers and figuring things out, they'll actually fill out their vital statistics and then add local emergency contacts. And you've got referrals that you can then say, would it be okay if I contacted these folks and offered them a personal wishes organizer? So, well, those are two pages that they can easily fill out on their own, because it's just information they have, birth date, where they were born, and all that kind of stuff. So, an extra pen, while I'm working on this, would you work on these things for me? It'll kind of speed it up just a little bit. And then they're distracted with that while you're doing the other paperwork. So those are
Okay.
easily fill out on their own.
Good question, Melanie. Any other questions from anyone? Okay, I not just for the new people, even if you've been here for 30 years and I want to congratulate, by the way, Armand, who has been here 32 years, and he is embracing all of this and learning it. And none of us, myself, Wes, Spencer, none of us are ever truly an expert. It always takes revising and practicing and relearning. You can't review it enough. So if there's any page in here that you kind of roll your eyes because you just hate that page or it's uncomfortable or you need help, spend the time, practice in the mirror, call us, call me, Michael, West, anyone, we'll practice with you, but get to where you'll at least cover it. Even if it's a little uncomfortable for you, it will make a big difference. Take the time. So thank you all for being on the call. Anything else, West?
No, this is just the core of the presentation. It is the must do. I'd encourage you to, I've always said to give a presentation every single day. So if you're not giving it to a family, go through the book. Just be really comfortable. The other thing too is be comfortable presenting the book upside down, so that family's seeing the pages. So if you're having them read that paragraph, I think that's fantastic. Just have them do that, but just be really comfortable that you're presenting the book upside down, so it's right side up for them typically. So get comfortable with that. I've seen people put notes in a practice book, cutting and pasting questions. So they have one that's rehearsing and going through. Maybe you've got someone that you can practice with. If you don't, you can practice on the owner. It's a really important thing. The last piece too, this is a total tangent, but I was thinking about it. Sometimes our funeral directors that we work with don't really understand what we do with families and the way that we present to them. And sometimes there's a little bit of a wall that's created. Even asking them if they've got some spare time, would you be okay if I shared with you our personal wishes organizer and how to go through it with the family? A few things are going to happen. They're going to actually really see and understand what you're having to do on a daily basis, how difficult that work must be. And what happens a lot of times is the funeral director will say, I had no idea that you did this. Like, this is what you work with families. So a lot of them don't even know the personal wishes organizer exists. And so it's a great opportunity to be able to kind of share with them what you're doing and what you're talking about and the value that you're bringing to the table when you meet with families that they're going to eventually meet with on the at-need side of the business. So
yeah, they're more likely to refer business
absolutely,
to you if they understand the value that you're bringing.
Yeah.
So good job, everyone. Thanks to those of you on the call. We'll also send out a recording of it. Hopefully this was helpful, and we appreciate every single one of you. Keep up the great work.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your week.